Hi everybody, I'm Louise Gittleman and I'm so pleased that you're with me today because we're going to be launching a new book called Before the Change, which is an updated and revised edition. Now this book, Before the Change, could really be before, during, and after the change because everything I talk about in the book has to do with hormones. And so moving from hormone havoc into hormone heaven is a real challenge in this day and age because the environment is so toxic. And so I'd like to plunge into all of your questions, all of your concerns. I have my trusty assistant, Allie, with me. She's going to be reading your wonderful questions, and I'll answer as many as I can. And I'm so glad for all of your support for all of these 30 years. So, Allie, take it away.
My daughter has a friend with extreme endometriosis, AnnLouise, and would love to steer her in the right direction. I have talked with a few ladies that have this issue as well. What should they do? What should they take? What should they do for repair and maintenance?
Okay, so endometriosis, which is symptomatic of estrogen dominance, is an issue that I talk about in great length at Before the Change, where you can purchase this for pre-orders at the Shop Now button on top of my page. And so when it comes to endometriosis, when it comes to problems with your weight, problems with your hair, problems with losing your hair, problems that you may be having in terms of your gallbladder, problems in terms of your emotions, what you have to do is understand that it's not the problem of the hormone per se, but what your liver is doing about conjugating and breaking it down. So there was a secret that I learned many, many years ago from an old friend of mine in New York City. You may recognize his name. It was Dr. Robert Atkins. Robert Atkins, although he's best known for his diet books, was one of the first functional medicine doctors out there, a functional medicine doc who believed in integrative health. And he taught me one thing about estrogen dominance, and that was that you look at the liver and look at 3 nutrients to make sure your body is breaking down all types of estrogen. Whether it's estrogen from hormone synthetic replacement therapy, whether it's hormones that are naturally produced by your body or hormones from the environment, those xenoestrogens. There are 3 magic nutrients. And those 3 magic nutrients are going to be good for any type of estrogen-related condition. Those nutrients, number 1, are choline. The second nutrient is inositol. Those are 2 B vitamins. The third nutrient is methionine. At 500 milligrams 3 times a day, your liver will be able to transform estradiol into the non-toxic estriol. You'll lose weight, you'll look great, and that's my secret. That secret, and of course many others, are in Before the Change. Next question, please, Miss Allie.
What is the average age for menopause, and what should I do about it? What are the normal symptoms? What should I be concerned about? And the million-dollar question, how do I safely deal with gray hair?
Well, there's no normal age anymore for menopause. We live in a toxic environment, which means that we have a toxic perimenopause, toxic menopause. The whole thing is menopause, quite frankly. We've got women as young as 28 that are coming down with perimenopausal symptoms. We've got people that are in their 40s and their early 50s that have stopped menstruating. So the reality is, although the average age is about 51, I'm seeing women that are much, much earlier in their 20s, their 30s, and their 40s that are coming down with the most predominant menopausal symptoms. Now, when I wrote Before the Change, I wrote this because I was in full-fledged perimenopause, but actually thought I was going crazy. You see, I never had a hot flash. I've never had a hot flash. I'm now beyond perimenopause and beyond menopause. And so there are a variety of symptoms that go along with the territory. They include sleeplessness, insomnia that you may never have had any time in your life, but all of a sudden you've got insomnia and you're waking up in the middle of the night at 2, at 3, at 4, can't get back to sleep, and you're wide awake, ready to go. So sleeplessness, disturbed sleep. The other perimenopausal, menopausal symptoms might be depression, might be anxiety, irritability, and the inability to lose weight. All of them, number 1, I would work with those 3 basic nutrients I just mentioned to you, the methionine, the inositol, and the choline. And then, of course, I would suggest that many of you consider a topical progesterone cream. Now, when I wrote my book, which first came out in 1999, there was very little on the market that was topical. And so I created something called Progesta-Key that I still use. I think that if you have a balance of progesterone and estrogen, you will not be suffering from many of these perimenopausal symptoms. It was the real product that saved my own perimenopause, and I'm sure it will do yours. You need 20 milligrams of progesterone at least For the first 25 days of your cycle, you leave it off for 5 days and then start again. So I'm a big believer in progesterone to balance estrogen and all of the estrogen-related symptoms. Now our next question, Miss Allie.
How many types of estrogen are there, and what do they all do?
Well, you've got your estrone, your estradiol, and your estriol. The one that you really want to be more cognizant of is the non-toxic or anti-cancer estrogen that was recognized many years ago, which is estriol. Now, the three nutrients I mentioned, and I keep mentioning throughout this little Q&A, the methionine, the inositol, and the methionine, inositol, and choline have the ability to transform estradiol into estriol. And so the estradiol and the estradiol are ones that are considered a little bit more potentially toxic if they're not balanced with something like progesterone. So what you want is that balance with the progesterone and the estradiol as well as a sufficient amount of estriol. Now, estriol can be produced if you've got those three nutrients, your liver is working properly, or you can use estriol as a suppository that many women do with a compounding pharmacy and a prescription that many of you will need. I'm a big believer in some of the, I'd say, bioidentical hormones, and I have some of them here to share with you that perhaps can be used by many of you that have had hysterectomies or really do not know how to balance your hormones in any other natural way. And so this is a little bit of a testosterone, and I know low T or high T are really concerns in this day and age, as well as a biest, which has the estradiol and a little bit of estrone. What I suggest for women that are really interested in bioidentical hormones that they monitor with constant testing, which of course is done through my office and through the auspices of Unikey, is that you use your testosterone, use about 1 milliliter, and your biest on days 1 through 25 of the calendar month if you've stopped menstruating or right after your cycle. And then from days 12 to 25, you're also going to be doubling up on progesterone, once in the morning, once in the evening, and for the first 12 days, just one little pump. So the balance that I'd like to see is really the progesterone with the estrogen, as well as with a little testosterone that women seem to need for libido that can start to lag during this time of year or during this time of your cycle, as well as for muscle strength and for cognitive ability. So I hope that kind of clarifies that situation. Miss Allie, next question.
Can I have normal estrogen levels and still be estrogen dominant?
So that's a great question. Can you have normal estrogen levels and still be estrogen dominant? You very well can if you have zero progesterone. Now, when I was first writing my book, which was way back in the 90s, I was able to consult with Dr. John Lee, who was the forerunner of the entire movement for progesterone. And what I learned from him is that because we do not have enough of the precursors, primarily your zinc and your B6, women are very deficient in progesterone. And so because of that, there's not the balance that we need to have, which is why your perimenopause and your menopause are not like your grandmother or your mother's menopausal experience. And so my concern is that you get your progesterone either through the precursors, again that would be zinc, maybe up to 50 milligrams a day, a little bit more B6, maybe a coenzyme activated B6, or just directly with some sort of topical cream. And remember that physiological dosage of the progesterone is 20 milligrams per day.
If I still get a regular period, could I be in perimenopause?
If you still get a regular period, could you be in perimenopause? Yes, because I still had a regular period up to the age of 51, but was very much in perimenopause because everything starts to shift. What you also have to understand is that during that time of your life, and it's a life cycle that we're talking about, when the ovaries start to dwindle down a little bit, the adrenals really start to take hold. So you need to have very strong adrenals to have a really good perimenopausal experience. And having strong adrenals is something that we're all challenged with in this day and age because of stress, whether it's emotional, physiological, or whether it's coming from all the EMFs that we are so devoted to and we are so addicted to, because that impacts your cortisol levels in terms of making them consistently high. Every time you sleep with your phone, every time you've got a smart meter that's pulsating, you are affecting your stress hormones. Your body produces at least 20 heat shock hormones, so you've really got to take a look at the environment to make sure that you're not being drained or you're being constantly triggered with too much cortisol.
What's the best way to increase free T and decrease estradiol?
So, to decrease estradiol, remember, it's the big three. The big three. And what are they? Once again, it's methionine, it's inositol, it's choline, 500 milligrams. And that 500 milligrams of choline will also decongest your liver if, in fact, you have a fatty liver. So I suggest, just in terms of all that the estradiol is very important to be metabolized properly into estriol. And in terms of low T, another secret that I share in my book, Before the Change, which I'm hoping you'll all pre-order today, is the use of a nutrient that many people don't recognize for testosterone, and that nutrient is boron. What we have learned through the years that at least 3 to 6 milligrams of boron will help a woman very specifically produce more testosterone. So I would make sure that your boron levels are shored up. Perhaps you can test that with a TMA, a tissue mineral analysis, and you'll be also able to, with that 3 to 6 milligrams of boron, take away your fluoride because it chelates fluoride. So that's really like a double whammy.
Do you recommend hair analysis?
Yes, I recommend hair analysis. I've been doing it for about 20 years. I recommend it for everybody. And the reason I do is that the hair analysis will give you a 20-page readout of your tissues in terms of the heavy metal concentration in your tissues or the balance of minerals. And if you take a look at the balance of minerals from your zinc to your copper, you'll learn about your hormones that way. What we know from tissue mineral analysis is that if you've got too much copper in your system, this is a biggie. If you've got too much copper, it also goes hand in hand with too much estrogen. And so you want to keep the copper just right. Now, how do you get too much copper? Well, you get it from your teeth because a lot of fillings are made with a high copper amalgam material. It's not just mercury we're concerned about, but copper in that regard. Copper water pipes in certain areas of the country. You're getting it from a copper IUD. Or if you're on a vegan diet, and listen to me about this one because this is very important. I've dealt with a lot of people over my 30 years of consulting. If you're on a vegan diet, then you're going to be getting a lot of copper in vegetarian-based foods, from your avocado to your nuts, your seeds, and your coffee and your teas, your green teas, your black teas, your white teas. So copper can be the nemesis if you're looking at balancing your hormones, and a TMA is the most non-invasive way of figuring out what's going on in your system, whether there's too much mercury, too much aluminum, too much uranium, which we're now seeing, or too much copper.
How do we know if progesterone cream will help?
How do you know if progesterone cream may help? Maybe take a tissue mineral analysis and figure out what your ratio is. Get a baseline, which is what I learned to do many, many years ago. And in that way, you'll find out what your levels are to begin with and what happens after that. Again, I like to take the progesterone cream from days 1 to 25 of the cycle. The first 12 days, it's one pump. From days 12 to 25, you take 2 pumps. Well, that's what we're finding over the years is the most successful way to keep you out of estrogen overload or estrogen dominance.
How do you suggest building adrenals?
Okay, that's a big question. How do we build the adrenals? Well, for one who's had adrenal burnout for most of her life, because what's worth doing is worth overdoing has always been my motto. You got to be careful with your adrenals. The most important nutrient is pantothenic acid. Now, nobody talks about it because they're all busy pushing all these different herbs of the month. I like pantothenic acid. It's the old standby. Pantothene is the most active form of pantothenic acid, and I'm a believer in 1 to 2 grams daily. So that's number one. You shore up your adrenals by pantothenic acid. It's the anti-stress vitamin, and that hasn't changed over the past 50 years. Now, in addition to that, there are adrenal tissue glandulars. You just have to make sure that the tissue glandular is from New Zealand. And there are herbs, and just make sure you're getting your herbs from a very clean source. I like rhodiola in that respect and ashwagandha, but for those that have a nightshade allergy, I just would use that rhodiola.
Can wearing a Fitbit at night disrupt sleep and cause cortisol/adrenal imbalances?
Okay, so for those of you that may or may not know, I wrote a book many years ago which was a step out of my comfort zone. It was called Zapped. It came out in 2010. Well, I was zapped for Zapped, where I talked about the looming problem of all of the electromagnetic fields that we're living in, because we live in a soup of EMFs. What we have found since then is that many individuals who are very sensitive cannot wear any kind of Wi-Fi based gadget, including a Fitbit. I wouldn't wear it to sleep. If you're going to wear it at all, wear it during the day. And when you're sleeping, you want an environment that's as EMF free as possible. Unplug everything. I would disable your computer. I would disable your router. I would shut off the electricity, and you'll have the best night's sleep ever.
Where do I get a tissue mineral analysis done?
Okay, so where do you get a tissue mineral analysis? From the company that I'm very proud to represent and have represented for 25 years. It's Unikey Health Systems. I'm a brand ambassador, which I have told you in all of my 30 books. And you can get to them at unikeyhealth.com, or call 1-800-888-4353. It is the most important thing you can do for yourself or a loved one. I just did this for a very, very dear nephew of mine, and I was thinking to myself, maybe he's got some heavy metals lurking somewhere. His molybdenum and and there was another mineral that was sky high, and I thought to myself, gosh, there's something in the environment these days that's truly very toxic. And so that's a wonderful way of assessing what's going on, and you can tell your glandular health by just the ratio of minerals. You can tell what's going on in your thyroid. You can tell what's going on with your blood sugar, and when you can tell what's going on with your adrenals. Easy peasy. It's the best way to get all kinds of parameters checked.
Okay, we have a couple of people asking, including the famous juice lady.
Oh, the famous juice lady.
They want to know if the book is updated and what is updated.
Okay, well, thank you, Sherry Kalbaum, for being on our Q&A today. Sherry Kalbaum is a new dear friend who's coming out with a new book on souping is the next juicing, and that's coming out in September, which is exactly the same time that this book is coming out, September 5th, right after Labor Day. So don't labor anymore. Don't be labor. Get the book. We have a lot of wonderful little gifts to give you. And in terms of it being updated, it was very definitely updated. This book swept on the New York Times bestseller list. I was very privileged to learn when I appeared on Dr. Phil many, many years ago. And he held up the book and he said to the audience, you need to buy this book, because this was the book that helped his wife, Robin, overcome all of her perimenopausal symptoms. My publisher said, Dr. Phil doesn't sell books. Well, New York Times bestseller many years later, he certainly did. I'm very grateful, and I've decided to update the book because there's so much about the liver and the toxic environment that's really impacting people's symptomology. I've included things about your thyroid you need to know that is not in any of these new books from Hashimoto's on down. I've included information about the adrenals that I've gleaned, information about progesterone, estrogen, what you need to do for your liver, and information about the bile, because ultimately, if you do not have a gallbladder, ladies or gentlemen, then your system will not be operating at full potential. You need bile, which is a precursor of positive digestion, and you need it because it's the most alkalinizing agent in the body. So if you're concerned about your pH, get thee some bile. If you don't have a gallbladder, get thee some bile. The product that I created for this book, as well as the previous one that you may be familiar with, the new Fat Flush plan, is Bile Builder, which has that 500 milligrams of choline to defat the liver. But it's also important to know that oftentimes the bile can become congested if you've got a lot of estrogen which is being thrown into the bile, because the bile is a detoxification method. So bile, very important. I talk about it here. Lots of new information, a few new recipes that I think you're really going to enjoy, and certainly some new research in terms of xenoestrogens in the environment.
Do you like licorice for low cortisol, and is it estrogenic at all?
I think licorice pulls up low cholesterol. Yes, it does. And there's certain liquids on the market that I think are outstanding. I like certain brands more than others, which we will post for you if you're so interested. It's hard to really elevate low cortisol properly. But besides the licorice, which yes is estrogenic, by the way, it most definitely is estrogenic, I would certainly try the adaptogenic low stress vitamin, which is pantothenic acid. I mean, I have no reason to tell you other than it probably is very adaptogenic for whether it's low cortisol, high cortisol. I love pantothenic acid. If you've got problems with your skin, if you've got spots on your skin, those age spots, it's one of the most important things for you. Very important also for collagen, which a lot of people don't realize. So bring back pantothenic acid or pantothene at 1 to 2 grams a day.
How does the parathyroid fit into all of this? I happen to be hypothyroid.
Parathyroid is very important in terms of controlling calcium metabolism. So together with magnesium, it may be the missing link. Rather than calcium, of course, I really focus upon magnesium, which I know is a hormone rescuer. So I would suggest that you get your parathyroid checked. There are blood tests that can assess what's going on with the parathyroid. If you know a kinesiologist, you can check that quite easily with muscle testing, very easily. And there's a product that is put out by Standard Process, and we've used their products for over 30 years. It's called Calma Plus, and just one little bottle of that will shore up your parathyroid. It has that DNA that's very important to rebuild parathyroid function. That could be very helpful. But if you do have hypothyroid, you want to look at what your levels of estrogen and progesterone are, your levels of copper. Let's not forget copper because it can sit on the thyroid and it can depress metabolism. You want to cut out all gluten. I talk about all that in great detail in Before the Change. And if you have Hashimoto's, you need to consider something like black seed, because at 2 grams a day, it's been found after 8 weeks to really assist with Hashimoto's thyroidiasis.
Do you have any tips for managing elevated bilirubin for those of us who have Gilbert syndrome and genetically we cannot conjugate it?
That's a really outstanding question. I'm wondering if the bile builder would be very helpful. I'm looking at bile builder in that regard. I've heard that choline may be very helpful at 500 milligrams 3 times a day, as well as perhaps some beetroot.
Okay. Are uterine fibroids a result of diet and environment?
You know, it's hard to say. It's certainly a result of estrogen dominance. So if you have uterine fibroids, number one, you should take a hormone test so we know where your progesterone and your estrogen are. You should take those 3 nutrients that I keep pummeling into you that I think are so very important, the big secret that Dr. Atkins shared with me. And I also think that we need to look at your iodine, because there seems to be a connection between uterine fibroids, breast problems, and your level of iodine. There are iodine loading tests you can take, or just doing a course of iodomir, iodoral, or maybe Lugol solution at 1 to 5 drops per day would be helpful. It's also been suggested that if you find some kind of topical iodine, you're able to put that on the area that you want decongested, which could be the uterus at this point, and you just put it topically on, and that would be 1 to 5 drops of something like a thyroid or an iodine tincture that you can get right in the pharmacy.
My zinc is fine, and I'm estrogen dominant, but I know that my copper is low. Should I still take copper in that case?
So zinc is fine, copper is low. If your copper is low, you should take a little copper. I would never go more than 2 milligrams a day, which is currently the recommended dietary allowance.
Is Before the Change applicable for people who are postmenopausal?
Yes, this is what I want to tell you. If I could have changed the title of this book, I would have called it Before, During, and After the Change, because everything that I write about is about hormones, whatever age and stage of life you're in. The information here is not just for those of you that are not yet menopausal. It's for those of you that are before, after, or during. I am beyond at this point, and I use a lot of that information, and it was my pleasure to be able to share it with you. There's particularly one new chapter that I added many different little tips to, and that was kind of the hidden cures for all kinds of problems that you may be having. What you do for hysterectomy, why men should use progesterone cream if they have prostate issues. So lots of what I've gleaned over my 30 plus years are all in this book. So I would encourage you to do something, and that is to make sure that you get the book, and then we can do more of these Facebook Lives.
All of my hormone levels have plummeted. plummeted recently. Do you have any advice?
If your hormone levels have plummeted, you've been under a great deal of stress. I'd first shore up the adrenals. I love the concept of 1 to 2 grams of pantethine daily. Anything that's simple is what I'd like you to do. Once you get involved with bioidentical hormones, it's pretty pricey. So whatever you can do that's not so expensive would be very helpful. And then, of course, using a topical progesterone cream, something like the Progestakey, would also be exceedingly helpful for you. I find that when the Progestakey is brought up to snuff, or the progesterone, then everything else seems to raise. I guess progesterone raises all hormones.
How long should I take thytrophin if I take it 2 to 3 times daily? Can I take it forever?
All right, so thytrophin is a tissue glandular that's put out by a company out there, Standard Process, and I'm proud to say that we've used Standard Process, as I mentioned, for years. My original teacher, Dr. Hazel Parcells, studied with Royal Lee. I think she taught him everything he knew, quite frankly, many, many moons ago. And thytrophin, if you take 3 thytrophin, it's considered to be equal to 1 grain of Armour thyroid. So if you take 3 in the morning, 3 mid-afternoon, you've got 2 grains a day. I wouldn't go beyond that. And yes, you may need help in shoring up your thyroid. With all of the toxicity in the environment, the Fukushima radiation that still is permeating the world, ladies and gentlemen, fact that we live near nuclear reactors, you need help for your thyroid. So yes, I would, because I do not believe it will harm you, and it is hormone-free.
I'm hypothyroid, have stage 3 adrenal fatigue. All of my hormones were very high during my last testing. I've been experiencing migraines weekly that last for days. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, you have to take a TMA. We have to see what your copper is. We have found a great connection between elevated copper and migraine headaches. So I really need to see that, and I would suggest you get in touch with Unikey as soon as you can and get a TMA.
My thyroid is low, yet I don't have cold hands and feet. I did take adrenal formula, and now my adrenals are healed. It has affected my thyroid. What is a good plan to boost it?
To still boost the thyroid, that's the question. What are we going to do to boost?
Yeah, her adrenals are healed, but she still needs to boost her thyroid.
So we need to check your iodine, because with many people that don't have Hashimoto's, it could be an iodine deficiency or it's a selenium deficiency. You have to look at what's happening with your T3. So you want to check the nutrients that convert inactive T4 to T3. I see a lot of selenium deficiency. I see zinc deficiency and sometimes even iron deficiency, and that can be checked with a tissue mineral analysis so we see what the tissues are holding on to. I think the TMA is your answer to so many of your queries and questions.
I'm on progesterone, estriol cream, DHEA, and a homeopathic formula for hormone balance.
Wow.
I'm in menopause and my hormones are out of balance. I know this because my doctor tested it. Is there anything I can use to replace the DHEA, or should I even replace it? Is there a better way?
DHEA is one tricky hormone. I have never had a client that's done well on DHEA. So you might want to consider pregnenolone, which is the grandmother of all hormones. I would just take 5 milligrams. I know Unikey has a 5 milligram one that I helped formulate. I would do pregnenolone once every 3 days, and then keep testing your hormones to see if it's working for you. Because with whatever I'm telling you, you're going to need to moderate your hormone levels, especially if you're on any kind of bioidentical. You should be testing every 2 to 3 months.
I have reached menopause and it was confirmed by a blood test. My doctor says I don't need hormones and that the progesterone creams don't work due to their molecular size. Does this make any sense to you?
No. No, categorically no. I wish that your doctor had read all of the very scientifically developed information that came out of John Lee's work. It's too bad that he has left us way too soon, like so many of these natural healers. No, it does not. This is a topical preparation which is actually absorbed transdermally, and you can see a difference in both blood tests and salivary hormone tests. As anybody that's been using a progesterone cream, a progesterone troche, or a progesterone internally.
People are interested to know more about what the testing comes with, what the results include.
Which testing?
The TMA, or any of them, the letters.
Okay, so there are 2 kinds of testing that we're talking about. So the TMA is the hair tissue mineral analysis. It comes with 20 pages with graphs and a full readout of what your levels mean. So the computer will generate a letter which will tell you you have high tissue B12, you're not metabolizing your B12. You need to take a methylated B12, and it's a wonderful confirmation for those of you that have an MTHFR difficulty. Or it will say that your mercury is too high. You need to take something to kind of pull it out. You need more selenium. Or it will say you have very low adrenal function because of your ratio of magnesium to sodium. And it will give you not just what the ratios are, but it will tell you what it means, and it will give you a readout of some very basic low-level vitamins and minerals. They're not orthomolecular, they're not fancy by any means, but they do the trick. And then we would retest in about 2 months. You need 1 tablespoon of hair from the back of your head, the nape of the neck. 1 tablespoon is nothing. Hopefully it's hair that has not been dyed. We want a pure sample as much as possible. It's one of the most important things I ever did. It's how I discovered I was a copperhead. I had extraordinarily high copper. Had no idea where it was coming from. I was not following a vegetarian diet at the time. But what I had was a mouthful of fillings, and half of them were loaded with copper, which was much more toxic to my system than I recognized. Very important. I'm just glad that question came up. There's also the six value hormone test that we also give to you, which comes with a letter from my office. I have a very capable coordinator at Sierra Ham who's ready to stand by and even give you consultations on your hormone testing.
How do you raise iron/ferritin if hair and blood tests are low?
If hair and blood tests are low, ferritin is like a double-edged sword. Iron is a double-edged sword. Usually you have to raise copper to raise iron. So copper and iron go together like love and marriage used to go together.
How long do you have to wait if you do color your hair for the testing?
Oh, not long. I mean, we all color our hair with hopefully non-toxic hair products. At least 3 weeks to get new growth. I think it's about 3 weeks. And you know, I've had people that have used this hair testing, quite frankly, and have not, they've had bleached hair, they've had colored hair, and we still get pretty dramatic results because it's all about the ratios.
What is the difference between, I'm going to mispronounce this, I know, between pantothine and pantothenic acid?
Pantothene and pantothenic acid. Pantothene
and
is...
the dosages.
The dosages are the same. Pantothene is more, how do I want to say, active. It's more biologically active. It's the activated form of pantothenic acid. And this was introduced to me years ago, as well as the big 3 that I taught you about today, from my very dear friend who ran one of the most successful integrative medicine clinics in New York City. This was Dr. Atkins. And we saw from time and time again how pantothene just healed everything. If you have low cortisol and high cortisol, just forget about all these fancy treatments. Get some pantothene. It's very inexpensive.
I used bioidentical hormones, started CBD oil, and had blood drawn. The results were high estradiol, progesterone, and testosterone. I'm having very bad migraines and not sure what to do. I'm miserable.
Gosh, I'm not sure what you should do too. First of all, if all those levels are really high, you have to stop. They may be too high for you. I don't know that. You have to take very small dosages. So you stop everything and do a test, and then little by little start adding some of these things back. Typically, and I don't know what kind of bioidentical this individual is taking, whether she's taking it by mouth or she's taking this topical, we don't know. But what you're going to do is support your liver regardless, let's say. And so you're going to take those 3 nutrients, which will help immensely.
Does Hormone Havoc lead to weight gain?
Hormone Havoc can very definitely lead to weight gain because too much estrogen seems to attract too much fat into your system. And the more estrogen you have, the more it can raise cholesterol in your bloodstream, and then it can clog up your gallbladder and the bile. So you've got to be, and then your body won't break down fats the way that it should. So we've got real issues going on. You've got to really balance your hormones. You know, years ago when we would say, this one is heavy, and we'd say, well, it's all in your glands. People would say, no, that's an excuse. It's not in the glands. Yes, it is in the glands. It's all about the thyroid, which can slow down during the perimenopausal stage of life, and I cover in great detail in this book. It's all about the adrenals and shoring up both of them. And it's more challenging in this day and age because of the toxicity in the environment and the fact that you're surrounded by electropollutants that impact your cortisol secretion. whenever you're in touch with a electromagnetic non-ionizing radiation emission.
How do you raise estrogen levels to safe for the skin and bone health without being out of balance with progesterone?
See, that's a really good question. It's raising estrogen levels naturally. All right, so you take the 3 nutrients to make sure it's being broken down, the methionine, the inositol, and the choline. Goes without saying, to make sure it's being broken down. You can do a number of things. You can do the biest, which is the bioidentical, or you can take another nutrient, which is another secret that I talk about in this book. I'm telling you some of my secrets, not all of them. And that is taking folic acid. Interestingly enough, a methylated folate at higher dosages, not just the 5 milligrams that we talk about, but maybe anywhere from 20 to 30 kind of mega folate, has been known to be a natural form of estrogen elevation. So taking that nutrient could be exceedingly helpful if there's no other way that you've used successfully to raise estrogen levels.
Why do women in menopause gain and hold on to weight if we no longer have high estrogen?
It's because, all right, so why do women in menopause gain and hold on to weight if we no longer have high estrogen? Because many of us are still estrogen dominant because we don't have enough progesterone. And interestingly enough, it's progesterone which burns calories. And the fact that we're not producing it anymore during a monthly cycle is a really big problem in terms of our deficit of fat-burning calories. So you need to balance your progesterone, number 1. You have to balance your thyroid, number 2, which can also take a slowdown, and then your adrenals, number 3.
What are some hormonal causes and remedies for ovarian cysts and endometriosis before menopause?
So ovarian cysts and endometriosis, you use the big 3 to be able to metabolize extra estrogen. All of these situations are within the realm of excess estrogen or estrogen dominance. So the big 3 nutrients that I mentioned, number 1. And then number 2, a little bit more iodine. So I would suggest that you take something like the iodoral or maybe 1 drop to 2 drops of Lugol's per day if there's not an issue with Hashimoto's.
What are the alternatives to hysterectomies?
The alternatives to hysterectomy are bioidentical hormones, and you have to have a balance of them, and you have to have a baseline of them so that you get your progesterone in balance, you get your testosterone in balance, and you get your estrogen in balance. And sometimes that means bioidentical, sometimes it means that megafolic acid that I spoke about, sometimes people use maca at 100 milligrams very successfully. And sometimes it means the folic acid, again, that I mentioned to you. So it's very individual. It's not one program, by the way, that works for everybody. So I give you a lot of alternatives here in the book.
I have osteopenia in my hips and lumbar region. I take OsteoKey and MagKey. Is there anything else I can do to speed up bone growth?
OsteoKey is a wonderful supplement that I help to formulate for Unikey Health Systems, and it contains a certain kind of hydroxyapatite, calcium hydroxyapatite, which is very well absorbed into the bones. It contains manganese. Nobody's talking about it. You need manganese for strong bones. It has some boron, as I recall. Very important in terms of estrogen building. And it has some lysine, interestingly enough. The only other ingredient that you might consider at a different time than OsteoKey is some strontium. Good questions, ladies. I'm just going to drink as Allie is here just shooting away for the questions.
I saw you mention black seed for hypothyroidism. How long before you would expect to see results, and would that mean we could lower our dosages of medication?
Well, I can't speak to lowering the doses of medication. That's up to you and your healthcare practitioner. But I do know in terms of the study that was done that it is 2 grams of black seed. Just get it from a very reputable source, please. And that was 2 grams daily of the powder, and it took 8 weeks to see results. At least they gave it to the subjects for 8 weeks, and then they saw the before and afters. So it's worth a try for Hashimoto's, as well as a gluten-free diet that many of you already are familiar with.
What hormone imbalances are associated with weight gain around the midsection, and how can I correct this?
So the major hormone imbalance is the cortisol imbalance. So that's where your adrenals come into play and your ability to handle stress. So that means that you need pantethine.
Do you have any suggestions for reducing my stress hormones?
Yes, pantethine. You know, we're going to keep it very simple. You don't need anything exotic. You have to keep it simple. We've gotten so esoteric that everybody is taking this homeopathic and this particular bioidentical hormone and this herb of the month. It's very simple. These are real basics that have worked for years.
Does bile play a role in hormone balance? If so, how can I make improvements?
Bile does play a big role in hormone imbalance because many of your hormones are dumped into the bile to be eliminated in the body. So you have to keep the bile really flowing, a high quality flowing well, and that's where a product like Bile Builder with ox bile comes in handy. That's where products like the choline, which is contained in the Bile Builder, come in handy. And if you don't have a gallbladder, it's an absolute must. I talk about bile, of course, with a great deal of interest in the book.
For men, how do you straighten out low hormones from pregnenolone to DHEA and testosterone?
Oh, for men, have your man do a hormone test with us. Get the 6 hormones, and that is the Unikey Health Systems. We do 6 hormone testing, and we'll figure it out. I have to see all the numbers together. We will give you a personalized letter based on your individual results from my office. I will review everything, find out what the ratios are, and then make suggestions. Offhand, I can tell you that low T is a real problem. Raising testosterone for a man is a little bit more tricky than with a woman. Remember, I said boron will do it with a gal, but it's not true with the men. And so we need to see the other levels and what they're doing.
What should I do for extremely high cortisol levels, and what causes this? I live a low-stress life, so I'm wondering what to do.
I don't blame you, but you're surrounded by stressors, whether you know it or not. They're invisible stressors. It's the EMF stressors with those 10 heat shock hormones that are emitted every time somebody has a cell phone and they're using it in your presence. So what you need to do is shore up your adrenals. And what do you do for that? You do the pantethine, 1 to 2 grams daily. Or you do the adrenal formula. If you really have problems with stress, we have something called the adrenal formula, which will help you at 7 in the morning, 11 mid-morning, and 3 in the afternoon, the adrenal times.
Can we take natural aromatase inhibitors to keep T from converting into estradiol, and what are the best ones?
I don't know. I know that I have worked with clients before that have used all kinds of aromatase inhibitors. Right now, what I suggest for most people, because for me they've been the most successful, is something like DIM at 100 to 400 milligrams a day, and I give that to both my men and my women. Many of my women and my men do a bioidentical testosterone because it's very tricky to make testosterone, quite frankly, and so they use DIM as just a precursor to make sure, or as a preventative to make sure that they're not also elevating estrogen.
What would be the difference in testing saliva once a day versus 4 times a day?
The saliva that we test 4 times a day, and this may be, I don't know if this is for the adrenals or this is for regular hormones, because hormones have a different circadian rhythm. Quite frankly, we just use a 1-a-day testing, which is first thing in the morning, and we'll get all 6. If you want to get more specific, we can figure out what you need to do during the day. I think the only hormone that you need to test for the 4 saliva samples are your cortisol levels, because they have a very specific rhythm. So I think it's the cortisol that's the most specific, because we'll find out what you need to do to make sure that you're waking up with a lot of energy in the morning. If your cortisol is low, or if it's too high at night, you're going to be waking up intermittently. So we'll know what to do and how to keep it low, how to keep it high, and when you need to take these things.
Can I take ox bile right after I eat?
I would take it during or after you eat, yes. Love ox bile. Or bitters. I love bitter because, as we know, bitter is better.
Why is the saliva test more accurate than the blood test?
I don't know if it's as accurate as the blood test anymore, quite frankly. I have clients that do both. Whatever you do, be consistent.
What's a good source of black seed powder for the thyroid?
I don't know. Don't know, but if you find a source, you can send it to the office and we'll tell you what we think about it. Anything that has an organic black seed. We had a situation on my Facebook page for my Facebook page called the FatFlush Nation, in which one of our gals took some black seed oil, which is now the latest, greatest new oil that's out there. She had a tremendously allergic response, so I'd be very careful at the source of black seed.
What is the best test for for adrenal fatigue?
Is our adrenal stress panel. The best test for adrenal fatigue is our adrenal stress panel. It's the 4-saliva test. 4 different samples will figure out what you need and when you need it. People with really low cortisol, we often give the adrenal formula as well as the pantethine. People with high cortisol, we sometimes give them something to bring down that cortisol, and that could be an adaptogen, and that's where rhodiola could come in very handy.
Is there a connection to fibromyalgia and declining hormones?
I think there's a connection between declining hormones and every disease known to man. And if you balance your hormones, every autoimmune situation will get better, which is why everybody needs to read before, during, and after the change. Yes.
Will taking iodoral shrink fibroids, and how much should I take?
I don't know how much you should take. Some people say 1, I think it's 12.5 mgs of iodine, which is a very hefty dose, to 4. That's up to 50 milligrams. There's some researchers that really believe in a heavy duty dosage. I'm not sure what I think about that. If you can get an iodine loading test, you can specify exactly how much. And if you've got an issue with uterine fibroids, it may be very worth your while to find a doctor, or we can help you locate one that gives that test.
What does it mean if you are deficient in B6 but your serum level is 99 and higher than the reference range? Should you look for a multivitamin with no B6?
I wonder if they check the coenzyme B6, so I can't give you a direct answer on that.
What is lowering T that we can avoid, such as fluorescent lighting?
Say that again?
What is lowering T that we can avoid, fluorescent lighting?
Is that lowering testosterone?
I'd assume so. They just said
Why is
T.
lowering testosterone like fluorescent lighting? I'm not aware that there's that major connection. But to lower testosterone, my favorite remedy is really saw palmetto. I use it for women. I've used it for kids that have acne. There's nothing like it. It just really, if their skin clears up immediately. So that's very important. And also spearmint tea.
Okay, we will do one more question.
One more question, and then I'm so grateful that you've all been so active.
And so this is kind of a general one.
General
I'm seeing
question.
From people, if you know you're in perimenopause or menopause for whatever reason and you're feeling really overwhelmed, what's the best first steps to take to start tackling your specific issues? Well,
the first step to take is get the book, because I talk about it, and I give you 10, I think we're still at 10 peri-zappers. And these are step-by-step peri-zappers which show you how to face all these perimenopausal symptoms. You've got to do that. You've got to understand that hormones are with us through every age and stage of life. You've got to shore up your liver. And you've got to keep in touch with us on Facebook. That's what you have to do, because next week we're going to be back and we're going to talk about the fats of your life.
Right. Everyone also is just saying how beautiful they think you look and thanking you for your time today.
Very sweet. Thank you.